Hello everyone. So today we are going to see how we can use APIGenie to create APIs out of a web application. Creating an API using APIGenie is a three-step process. Step number one is to record the user's action. Now we can record the user's action using our Chrome extension. Now once we record the user action, we are going to define the outputs and inputs for our API. Now once that is done, we are simply going to use the APIs. So here's the plan. We are going to create an API to get the list of news titles, and we are going to use Hacker News as our sample website. The next is we are going to upload the news. Now the reason we are going to do this is it requires user to be authenticated. So we are going to demo how we can authenticate the user and perform some action, right? And the third one is, if time permits, we are also going to see how we can update a user profile, right? So let's get started. So let's get started with recording users action first. Now in order to do that, I've already installed Chrome extension. You can also do that by visiting. You can find the extension on Chrome Web Store. Now in order to record user session, just right click and click on inspect. Go to DHQ APIGenie web recorder. Now select the appropriate project. Now this is very important because it will save all your recordings against this particular project. Click on start capture. Now whatever I'll perform, it will get recorded. Let's reload this website. Okay. So now as you can see here, this particular page load has been captured, right? And the URL is /news. Now we have a list of titles in front of us. The next step is we want to upvote it, right? So in order to upvote, first of all, we'll have to log in. Let's click on login. Let me enter my credentials. Click on login. Yeah, so now the login is done, right? And let me go ahead and upvote this particular news item, the real power of Linux executables. Okay, yes. Now I went ahead and upvoted this particular item. Okay, and let's see if we can see this particular upvote in our profile. Upvoted submission. Yeah, so now you can see this particular news item which I had upvoted is visible in this list. So once the recording is done, we need to select what all actions we actually want to save. Like, there are a lot of actions which we might not need. So let's select this particular action, which is loading of news item. Let's select this action of login, and I would also like to select the action of voting, right? Right, so when you click on details, you can also see other stuff like the URL parameters and everything. And we also want to see the list of upvoted items. Okay, so let's save this 1, 2, 3 and 4 recordings, and let's name this as HQ demo. Boom, saved. I've saved my recordings. So what's the next step? The next step is we'll go to our APIGenie console and we'll define our inputs and outputs, right? So let's close this. This is our APIGenie console. So as you can see, we have 1, 2, 3 and 4 recordings. Okay, let's select the first recording, which is loading of news item. Now this is the page which we recorded. Now let's go ahead and select titles. So when we select the title, the system will automatically identify the remaining titles. Now this is done based on the class name. And let's add this as our first output. Okay, so we have added titles. The next, we would also like to have the URL of the story. So let's click on this again and add new and name this as URLs. But this time we don't want the content. Instead, we want the href, that is the URL of the stories, right? And the other thing is we need ID of this news items in order to upload. Go to code view and use regex to get the IDs. So basically it will match an anchor tag which will also have a data attribute called ID along with href. So as you can see here, we have this anchor tag which has ID associated with it. Okay, so when we want to upload this particular news item, we also need to send this ID, right? So we have selected this ID using a regex. Let's add this, and yeah, this is the first group which we want as an output, and we want all the items, right? And let's name this as news ID or IDs. Let's go and preview it. So in preview you can see we have a list of titles, we have list of URLs corresponding to the titles, and the corresponding news IDs. So we have our first API ready. Let's go ahead and publish this. Now it is very important to publish this API because then only you will be able to use this API. So while publishing, let's give this particular API an endpoint name, say for example titles, and some description. Boom, we have our API ready. Let's go to preview, use tab, and select the API version. Now every time you publish, you modify or publish an API, a version gets bumped up and a new version gets created. So in order to use this API, this is your API URL, this is your API key, and let's run this. Yes. So now you can see when we run this particular API, we are getting a list of titles, list of URLs, and something called session token. Now so this session token is useful when we are already logged in, so we'll come to that part later. Now let's execute this particular API in a Postman as well, just to give you a demonstration. So, and we also need to pass the API key. Yeah. So as you can see, we have titles, URLs, and news IDs, right? So guys, we have our first API ready. So next thing is login. We will go ahead and create an API to perform login action, and then we will go and create an API to do an upvote. So let's get back to our project. Let's find the login API. Yes, this was the one. Let me select it. So basically login is a post action, which means you won't see any web preview and since this is a post action, we will have something called input, and you can see this is a post action. And in body we have some form data, like this is the username and this is the password. So let me clear the username and password because I don't want to hard code this. So let me pass this as a placeholder when I'm actually using the API, and I'll be passing a parameter called username and password while using the API. Let's go ahead and publish this. Let's give this endpoint name as login. Okay. So now our login API is done. Let's go back to our project and define API to upvote a news item. So this is the one. Let's go to input. Now this is a get request, and in query string you can see we are passing the ID of the news item. This is the action upvote. So let's pass this ID while using the API. That's it. Let's publish this and name this as upvote. So now in order to upvote, we need to perform two actions. One is we need to log in. Now once we log in, we will get a session token, and we need to use that session token to do an upvote. Let's go to our login API which we created. Go to preview. Yes. Okay, so let's select the latest version. This is the endpoint. Let's check if we can log in and touch this API. Let's go to Postman. So let's copy this URL. Remember, we need to send the API key, and we also need to send our parameters such as username and password. Right. So we are getting the status 200 OK, which means our request was successful. And since we haven't defined any output, we are getting the raw HTML as an output. Okay. And we have something called session token. This is very important. We'll use this in subsequent request for upvoting a news item. So now since we are done with login, let's go ahead and do some upvoting. Right. So in order to do upvoting, let's go to the upvote API which we created. Now in order to go to APIs which I've already created, there's a section called APIs. So let's click the APIs and see what all APIs we have. Here it is. We have an API to upvote. Let's select this particular API. Go to preview and go to the use tab. Here you can select the version. This is the latest one. Let me copy this API URL. Okay. Go back to my REST API client. Let me provide API key and session token. Now this session token corresponds to my login, so this is the one which I've received. Let me provide the session token and the API key. Okay. Now along with these two things, we need to also provide something called ID, because that ID is part of our dynamic input. So let's try to upload this first item, and when you're done you will see that your session token remains same. Now this is useful when you want to perform a lot of simultaneous action, because you won't be doing login every time, right? You will be doing login once until and unless you are unauthenticated, and you can use the same session token for your simultaneous request. So we have done upvoting, and now let's verify whether our upvote is done or not. So let's check. Let's go to our profile and upvoted submission. So as you can see here, we have this particular item upvoted, and we can see it is coming in our upvoted list, right? So we have done a successful upvote using an API. Now let's go ahead and perform some profile updation using API. So in order to do that, I will have to first of all record my action. So let's go ahead and record profile update action. Select THQ demo as project, start capturing. Let me minimize this a bit. Okay. Let me write update 1 and submit an update. Okay. So here we can see this particular request has been captured. Let me select this and save it as profile update. Okay. Let's get back to our console. Click on a project. Here it is, profile update API. Let's go to input. First of all, let's clear the content length because that will be dynamic. Go to body, and in body this is our text. Okay, so let me pass this text via API. Okay, I'm not changing anything else. Let me go ahead and publish this profile update. Okay, go to preview, use, select the API version, and here is my API ready. Okay. So let's use this API. Let's switch back to Postman. I've copied my API URL along with API key, session token, and let's pass the about me as update 3. Now let's copy the API key from here and the session token. Okay, and it's time to update. Boom. Let's verify whether our profile has been updated or not. So let's switch back to Hacker News, go to profile information, and let's refresh this. Yes, so you can see here it shows update 3. This is cool. So guys, we have done a couple of things. We have built an API to get a list of titles. We built an API to upvote a news item, and we also built an API to update the profile. Isn't that cool? So guys, you might have noticed here in one of our APIs, let's say in get titles, if you can look at the preview, we have three different arrays, right? The URL, the IDs, and the titles. Now these three are different arrays. Now wouldn't it be cool if we can have an array of object which has title, URL, and ID, right? So let's do some post processing on this particular item, and for that we have something called post process. So let's go ahead and see how we can get a proper output, right? So we have something called post process. Now whatever data massaging you want to do, you can do it here. Now let's say I want output in this particular format, like I think, yeah. So now we have a proper array of elements which contain the title, the URL, and the corresponding ID, right? How cool is that? So let's go ahead and publish this as a new version. Okay, so now we have version 2. Let's go ahead and try this out. Yeah, so we have an array of element. That was APIGenie. Thank you.